Hi, I'm Elena Rosewood and I'm 28 years old. Last Tuesday, I walked into the prestigious law firm where my older sister Victoria works as a senior partner. I asked to speak with someone about my inheritance rights. She laughed in front of 3 junior associates and said, "We don't handle charity cases here, sweetie." What they didn't know was that I owned the building they were standing in and had the power to dissolve their lease with a single phone call. But the real power wasn't in the property, it was in the 15 years of silence I'd kept about what really happened to our father's fortune. If you've ever been betrayed by those you loved most, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of manipulation. The October rain in Boston had been relentless for 3 days, turning the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill into mirrors that reflected the amber glow of old street lamps. I pulled my navy wool coat tighter as I climbed the granite steps of Hartwell and Associates, the law firm that had handled my family's affairs for over 50 years. The brass nameplate gleamed despite the weather, polished daily by someone who probably earned more respect in this building than I ever had. My reflection caught in the glass doors as I paused. 28 years old, and I still felt like that awkward teenager who'd been told she wasn't smart enough for law school, pretty enough for society events, or valuable enough to inherit anything meaningful from the Rosewood family fortune. The woman staring back at me wore thrifted clothes but carried herself with a quiet dignity I'd learned to cultivate over years of being overlooked. I wasn't here for myself, though. Mrs. Chen from apartment 4B had been evicted last week after falling victim to a predatory reverse mortgage scam. Her 17-year-old grandson David was now sleeping in his car, trying to finish his senior year of high school while his grandmother stayed in a shelter downtown. She'd looked at me with those tired, desperate eyes and whispered, "Elena, you always were the smart one. Maybe you could ask someone at one of those fancy law firms? David's so bright, he got into MIT, you know." But without a stable address. Her voice had trailed off, but I understood. David needed legal help to understand the terms that had destroyed their lives, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to reverse the damage. The receptionist, a blonde woman with perfect teeth and a practiced smile that never reached her eyes, looked me up and down as I approached her marble desk. Her gaze lingered disapprovingly on my jeans, clean but clearly from Target, my boots that had been resold twice this winter, and my bag, a leather satchel I'd found at an estate sale in Cambridge for $15. The leather was good quality vintage, but the brass clasps were tarnished in a way that screamed secondhand to anyone who knew how to look. Still, I held my head high. I'd learned long ago that posture could sometimes compensate for the wrong zip code on your driver's license. "I'd like to speak with someone about inheritance law," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the familiar flutter of anxiety in my chest. "Pro bono consultation." She glanced at her computer screen with theatrical boredom, then back at me. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I can wait." I gestured toward the leather chairs arranged around a glass coffee table laden with copies of Harvard Law Review and the Financial Times. "I understand these things take time." Her smile became even more artificial. "I'm afraid we're quite booked today. Perhaps you could try calling next week? Though I should mention, our attorneys typically require a retainer of at least $5,000 before taking on new clients." $5,000. Mrs. Chen's entire life savings had been $3,200 when the mortgage company descended on her like vultures. Before I could respond, I heard the familiar click of designer heels on marble. The sound made my stomach clench with old familiar dread. Victoria emerged from the elevator bay like she was making an entrance at a Broadway show, stunning as always in her charcoal Armani suit. I recognized it from her Instagram posts. Her auburn hair swept into a perfect chignon that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Behind her trailed 2 younger lawyers, associates judging by their eager expressions and slightly cheaper suits. One was a young woman with ambitious eyes and a leather portfolio clutched against her chest. The other was a man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of smile that suggested he'd learned early how to laugh at the right jokes. Well, Victoria's voice carried across the lobby with that particular blend of surprise and condescension she'd perfected sometime during our teenage years. The tone that said she was delighted to see me but not in any way that would benefit me. "Elena, darling. What brings you to the grown-up building?" The associates chuckled obediently. The receptionist suddenly found her keyboard fascinating, but I caught the smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. A few other people in the lobby, clients, other lawyers, support staff, turned to watch what promised to be an entertaining show. "I need to speak with someone about inheritance rights," I repeated, keeping my voice steady and professional. I'd practiced this moment in my mirror for weeks, knowing that eventually I'd have to face Victoria on her own turf. Victoria's smile widened and she moved closer, her audience following like well-trained puppies. "Inheritance rights? Oh, honey." She turned to the associates with the kind of conspiratorial glee that suggested they were about to witness something special. "This is my little sister, Elena. Still thinks she's entitled to something even after all these years." The young man with glasses grinned eagerly. "Family drama in the law. The best kind." "Indeed," Victoria replied, then looked back at me with mock sympathy. "Elena, sweetheart, we've been through this. The will was very clear. Father left everything to me because I had the education, the connections, the business sense to manage it properly. You know this." "I'm not here about Father's will," I said quietly. "Oh." Victoria's eyebrows rose in theatrical surprise. "Then what inheritance are we talking about? Did some long-lost relative leave you a fortune?" She laughed, a sound like champagne flutes clinking at a party I'd never be invited to. How delightfully mysterious. The female associate leaned forward slightly, clearly enjoying the show. "What kind of inheritance law are you dealing with exactly?" Victoria answered before I could speak. "Elena here has always been a bit imaginative. She went to MIT, very smart with computers and all that technical stuff, but she never quite grasped how the real world works. Money, power, social connections, these things require a certain sophistication." "I graduated summa cum laude," I said quietly. "Of course you did, darling. You always were good with schoolwork. But this," Victoria gestured around the opulent lobby, "this requires a different kind of intelligence. The kind that understands how things really work in Boston society." The receptionist nodded knowingly. The associates exchanged glances that said they understood exactly what kind of family dynamic they were witnessing. I was the embarrassing poor relation who'd shown up to beg for scraps. "Elena," Victoria continued, her voice taking on the patient tone she probably used with difficult children, "we don't handle charity cases here, sweetie. Have you tried legal aid? I think there's an office in Southie that might be more your speed." The lobby fell silent except for the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers and the distant hum of elevators moving between floors. A few other lawyers had emerged from offices, drawn by the commotion like sharks sensing blood in the water. I felt their eyes on me, measuring, dismissing, cataloging me as the kind of person who didn't belong in their world. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I'd learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than any argument. Sometimes the most devastating response was no response at all. I adjusted the strap of my bag and walked toward the elevator bank, my boots making no sound on the polished marble. "Elena," Victoria called after me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Tell Mother I said hello when you see her at the charity dinner tonight. Oh wait, you weren't invited to that either, were you?" More laughter rippled through the lobby. I pressed the button for the elevator and waited, watching my reflection multiply in the polished brass doors. When they opened with a soft chime, I stepped inside without looking back. As the doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of Victoria holding court in the lobby, probably regaling her audience with stories about her strange little sister who'd never learned her place in the world. The associates were laughing, the receptionist was smiling, and Victoria was basking in the attention like a cat in a sunbeam. The elevator descended in silence, carrying me away from the marble and mahogany world where my sister ruled supreme. But as I walked out onto the street and felt the cool October air on my face, I found myself smiling for the first time in days. They had no idea what was coming. That evening, I sat in my small apartment in Jamaica Plain, miles away from the Back Bay elegance where Victoria lived in our grandfather's four-story townhouse. The distance between our neighborhoods was more than geographic, it was a chasm of class and expectation that had defined our relationship since childhood. My apartment was tiny but warm, filled with the scent of chamomile tea and old books. I'd made this place home with second-hand furniture rescued from estate sales and yard sales. A worn leather couch that had probably cost thousands when it was new, a dining table with mismatched chairs that I'd painted white to create some cohesion, bookshelves made from boards and bricks that held my collection of computer science textbooks alongside well-thumbed novels and poetry collections. Plants lined the windowsills, survivors that I'd nursed back to health from the clearance sections of garden centers. A spider plant cascaded from a macrame hanger I'd made during a particularly lonely weekend. The walls were covered with art I'd bought from struggling artists at street fairs, mixed with photographs I'd taken during long walks through the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine in a way that nothing in the Rosewood mansion had ever been. I pulled my laptop from beneath the couch cushions and powered it on. The machine was older than I'd like but meticulously maintained. I'd built it myself from components I'd carefully selected and purchased over several months. The screen flickered twice before stabilizing into the familiar glow of my desktop. I poured myself a cup of tea, cheap chamomile from the grocery store, nothing like the imported teas Victoria preferred, and settled into my routine. First, I entered my primary passphrase, a combination of numbers and letters that referenced a paper I'd published in graduate school about cryptographic security. Then came the second layer of authentication, a fingerprint scanner I'd installed myself. Third layer, retinal scan through my webcam, utilizing software I'd written specifically for this purpose. Fourth layer, voice recognition that analyzed not just my words but the unique patterns of my speech. Fifth layer, a time-sensitive code generated by an app on my phone that synchronized with satellites orbiting overhead. Sixth layer, a behavioral authentication that analyzed the rhythm and pressure of my typing. And finally, the seventh layer, a phrase I typed with steady fingers, letter by letter. The meek shall inherit the earth. The portal opened to reveal an interface that existed in fewer than a dozen terminals worldwide. Clean, minimalist, terrifyingly powerful. My name wasn't anywhere on it, that was intentional. In another life, or perhaps just another identity, I had been E. Rose, the anonymous architect behind the digital security system that protected nearly 40% of New England's major financial institutions. The irony wasn't lost on me that Victoria's law firm was among my clients. A message was waiting in my encrypted inbox, marked with the highest priority designation. Marcus Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen from my building, though the coincidence had always struck me as oddly appropriate, was my business partner and the only person who knew the full extent of what we'd built together. Status update on Project Inheritance? His message read. I smiled and typed back, Phase 1 complete. Beginning Phase 2 tomorrow. Marcus and I had met during my junior year at MIT. He was a visiting researcher from Stanford, working on blockchain architecture while I was deep in my thesis on penetration testing and system vulnerabilities. We'd bonded over terrible coffee in the computer science building's basement lab and a shared frustration with the way technology was being used to perpetuate inequality rather than address it. After graduation, while Victoria was collecting accolades at Harvard Law School and making connections at charity galas where tickets cost more than most people earned in a month, Marcus and I had been building something revolutionary from a shared workspace in Cambridge. We'd started with nothing but an idea. What if we could create a security system so robust, so elegant, so utterly impenetrable that it would become the gold standard for financial institutions across the region? Quantum securities had grown from those late nights and endless cups of coffee into something neither of us had quite anticipated. We hadn't set out to become wealthy, we'd simply wanted to build something that mattered. But when banks and investment firms and law offices started paying millions for our software, when governments began requesting our services for their most sensitive data, when Fortune 500 companies competed for our attention, wealth had been an inevitable byproduct. The beautiful part was that almost no one knew who we really were. Quantum Securities existed as a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and carefully constructed corporate veils. Marcus appeared at client meetings as our director of client relations, while I remained completely invisible, the mysterious E. Rose whose identity was protected by the same security protocols we designed for our clients. Victoria had signed the contract bringing Quantum Securities to Hartwell and Associates 2 years ago. I'd watched through encrypted video feeds as she'd sat in the conference room, pen poised over documents that would give me access to every byte of data that flowed through their servers. She'd never thought to look past the corporate paperwork to see who she was really hiring. Now I opened the Hartwell and Associates monitoring interface and began my work. Every email, every phone call, every keystroke made within the building was recorded and analyzed by systems I'd designed. It was all perfectly legal. Quantum Securities contracts were very explicit about data monitoring for security purposes, and I'd personally ensured that the language was ironclad. I started with Victoria's office communications from the past 6 months. What I found was even worse than I'd expected. There was Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who'd been charged $15,000 to draft a simple will, then had her file closed when she questioned the bill. Victoria had laughed about it in an email to a colleague. Some people have champagne tastes and beer budgets. Not my problem. There was Mr. Rodriguez, the man whose family I'd heard about through Mrs. Chen's networks. He'd paid Hartwell and Associates his entire life savings, $8,200, to fight an eviction after his wife's cancer treatment had bankrupted them. Victoria had dropped his case the moment she realized he couldn't afford additional fees, leaving him to face housing court alone. In her notes she'd written, "Client unrealistic about legal costs. Cut losses and move on." There was Sandra Williams, a single mother who'd been sold a fraudulent insurance policy and needed help getting her money back. Victoria had taken a $5,000 retainer, then assigned the case to a first-year associate who'd never handled insurance fraud. When the case predictably failed, Victoria had kept the money and sent Sandra a bill for additional research costs. Case after case of people who'd been abandoned, exploited, or simply dismissed because they didn't fit Hartwell and Associates' preferred client profile. And running through all of it was Victoria's voice, either in emails or in recorded phone calls, demonstrating a callousness that went beyond simple business pragmatism into something approaching cruelty. But it was the next discovery that made my hands tremble as I typed. Victoria had been systematically overbilling clients for years, padding hours and inventing fees that had no basis in reality. Worse, she'd been running unauthorized subletting arrangements within the building, renting out unused conference rooms and office space to other businesses without reporting the income to the building's owner. The building's owner. Me. I leaned back in my chair, processing the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Through a web of shell companies and trust funds that traced back to money my father had quietly funneled to me over the years, I owned 1247 Beacon Street, the entire building that housed Hartwell and Associates. Victoria had been stealing from me for 3 years while simultaneously humiliating me in the lobby of my own property. I opened another application and navigated to the building's financial records. The unauthorized subletting had generated approximately $45,000 per month in unreported revenue. Over 3 years, Victoria had stolen more than $1.6 million from me. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mother. "Victoria says you stopped by her office today. Really, Elena, you must learn when to let things go. Some battles aren't worth fighting." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Mother had made her choice years ago when Victoria started her systematic campaign to erase me from family history. Every missed birthday, every holiday I wasn't invited to, every family photo I was cropped out of, Mother had been complicit in all of it. I opened my banking application and checked the balance in my primary account. The number that appeared on the screen would have made Victoria's eyes widen in shock. $47.3 million, liquid assets available for immediate transfer. That was just the beginning. My investment portfolio, real estate holdings, and ownership stakes in various technology companies brought my net worth well into 9 figures. All of it built quietly, carefully, while my family assumed I was struggling to make ends meet in my tiny Jamaica Plain apartment. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. David Chen answered on the second ring, sounding tired and worried. "Ms. Rosewood? Is everything okay? It's kind of late." "David, I'm sorry to call so late. I wanted to update you on your grandmother's situation. I think I've found someone who can help." "Really?" The hope in his voice made my chest tight. "One of those big law firms." "Something like that. Don't worry about the cost, it's all taken care of. I need you to focus on finishing school and getting ready for MIT." "Ms. Rosewood, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, David. Just promise me you'll use your education to help other people when you can." "I promise." After I hung up, I opened my laptop again and began typing an email to Jonathan Hartwell III, the founding partner whose name was on the building's directory. The message was brief and formal. "Mr. Hartwell, I represent the ownership entity for 1247 Beacon Street. We need to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss several lease violations that have come to our attention. Please respond within 24 hours. Best regards, Elena Rosewood, Principal, Beacon Properties LLC." I hit send and closed the laptop. Tomorrow I would return to Hartwell and Associates. But this time I wouldn't be asking for help. This time I would be delivering a reckoning. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, as if the city had washed itself clean overnight in preparation for what was to come. I dressed with the same care a general might use preparing for battle, a black wool blazer I'd found at an estate sale in Brookline and had tailored to fit perfectly, charcoal pants that had cost a fraction of Victoria's wardrobe but looked just as professional, and low heels that wouldn't betray my nervousness with their sound. In my leather portfolio, the same second-hand bag that had drawn such disdainful looks yesterday, I carried 3 documents that would change everything. The first was a complete record of Victoria's unauthorized subletting arrangements, including bank statements showing where the money had been deposited. The second was a comprehensive audit of her billing practices, with highlighted examples of the most egregious overcharges. The third was the deed to 1247 Beacon Street, clearly showing Beacon Properties LLC as the sole owner and myself as the principal. I arrived at Hartwell and Associates at exactly 9:30 a.m., timing my appearance to coincide with Victoria's weekly staff meeting. Through the building's security system, which I controlled, I knew she'd be in conference room A for at least another 20 minutes, regaling junior associates with war stories and strategic advice they'd never be able to afford to implement. The same receptionist greeted me with barely concealed irritation, her perfect smile faltering slightly when she recognized me from yesterday's performance. "You again. I told you yesterday that we don't." "I'm here to see Mr. Hartwell," I said calmly, placing a business card on her marble desk. The card was simple, elegant. Elena Rosewood, Principal, Beacon Properties LLC. "It's regarding the building lease." She glanced at the card, and I watched her expression shift from annoyance to uncertainty. Building management was serious business in Boston, where commercial real estate could make or break a law firm's reputation. Let me call his office." While she made the call, I stood in the lobby where Victoria had humiliated me less than 24 hours earlier. The space looked different now that I knew I owned it, smaller somehow, less intimidating. The marble floors that had seemed so imposing yesterday were just expensive stone. The oil paintings on the walls were just decorations. The intimidating atmosphere that had made me feel so out of place was just theater, designed to impress people who didn't know the difference between actual power and expensive staging. "Mr. Hartwell will see you now," the receptionist said, her tone noticeably more respectful. "Please take the elevator to the 15th floor. His assistant will meet you there." The elevator ride gave me a moment to center myself. I watched the floors tick by. 2nd floor where the junior associates worked in cramped offices, 5th floor where Victoria held court in her corner suite, 10th floor where the conference rooms hosted the meetings that shaped the city's legal landscape, and finally, the 15th floor where the real power resided. Jonathan Hartwell III was waiting for me outside the elevator, a gesture of respect that told me he'd looked up Beacon Properties LLC and discovered that we owned significantly more than just his building. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm presence that came from 40 years of handling crises without showing panic. "Ms. Rosewood," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming in. I have to admit, I wasn't expecting this meeting." His office occupied the entire corner of the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a commanding view of Boston Common and the State House dome gleaming in the morning sun. The space was decorated with the kind of understated luxury that signaled serious money. Persian rugs that probably cost more than most people's cars, first-edition law books lining mahogany shelves, and photographs of Hartwell with senators, governors, and Supreme Court justices. "Mr. Hartwell," I said, settling into the chair across from his massive desk, "are you aware that your firm has been in violation of its lease agreement for the past 3 years?" He blinked, clearly not expecting the conversation to begin so directly. "I'm sorry." I opened my portfolio and withdrew the first document, sliding it across the polished surface of his desk. Section 12, subsection C of your lease agreement clearly states that subleasing any portion of the premises requires written consent from the building owner. Your firm has been operating 3 unauthorized subletting arrangements, generating approximately $45,000 per month in unreported revenue. Hartwell's face paled as he scanned the lease agreement. His eyes moved quickly across the familiar language, but I could see the exact moment when he registered the implications. I wasn't aware of any subletting arrangements. They were initiated and managed by Victoria Rosewood, your senior partner. I placed the second document on his desk. These are the signed subletting contracts, along with bank records showing where the payments were deposited. As you can see, the revenue was never reported to building management, nor were the required percentages paid according to your lease terms. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages, examining contracts he'd never seen and bank statements that told a story of systematic deception. The subletting arrangements were sophisticated. Victoria had set up separate corporate entities to handle the transactions, making it nearly impossible for casual oversight to catch the violations. "This is quite serious," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "The financial liability alone, and the ethical implications for the firm." "There's more," I said quietly. He looked up at me with the expression of a man who'd realized he was in deeper water than he'd initially thought. I placed the third document on his desk, a comprehensive audit of Victoria's billing practices over the past 2 years. Your senior partner has been systematically overbilling clients, often by margins of 300 to 500%. She's also been abandoning cases after taking retainers from clients who can't afford additional fees. Hartwell's breathing became more labored as he reviewed the evidence. I'd organized it carefully, starting with the most clear-cut examples of overbilling and moving through progressively more egregious cases of client abandonment. Each case was documented with email communications, billing records, and time logs that painted a picture of a lawyer who'd forgotten why she'd entered the profession in the first place. "Mr. Rodriguez," Hartwell said, reading from one of the files. "I remember this case. Victoria assured me it was closed due to unrealistic client expectations. Mr. Rodriguez paid your firm his family's entire life savings to fight an eviction. Victoria dropped his case when she realized he couldn't afford additional fees. He's now homeless. Mrs. Patterson charged $15,000 for a simple will, then dropped when she questioned the bill. Sandra Williams lost her case because Victoria assigned it to a first-year associate, then kept the retainer and billed for additional costs." Hartwell set the documents down and rubbed his temples. "Ms. Rosewood, I need to ask, how did you obtain this information?" I reached into my portfolio and withdrew a fourth document, one I'd prepared that morning. Quantum Securities has been providing digital security services to your firm for 2 years. All of this information was collected through our standard monitoring protocols, which are clearly outlined in our service agreement. His eyes widened as he scanned the quantum securities contract, the contract Victoria had signed without bothering to read the fine print. You're Ye Rose? I am. The Elena Rosewood who owns this building is the same Elena Rosewood who founded Quantum Securities? Yes. He stared at me for a long moment, recalculating everything he thought he knew about the young woman sitting across from his desk. Victoria is your sister. She was my sister. Now she's your liability. Just then, the door opened and Victoria swept in, her phone pressed to her ear in the familiar gesture of someone too important to wait for permission to interrupt. Jonathan, I need to talk to you about the Morrison case. The client is being unrealistic about settlement amounts, and I think we need to. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me sitting in the chair across from Hartwell's desk. For a moment, her face went through a fascinating progression of emotions, confusion, annoyance, and then something approaching panic as she noticed the documents spread across the desk. Elena? What are you doing here? Her eyes moved from me to Hartwell to the papers between us. What is this? Hartwell cleared his throat, and I could hear the strain in his voice. Victoria, please sit down. I'll stand, thank you. But her voice had lost its usual confidence. She was studying the documents on the desk, trying to read them upside down. Ms. Rosewood, Hartwell said, looking at me, would you like to explain the situation to your sister? I turned to Victoria, who was now staring at the papers with growing alarm. For the first time in my adult life, I had her complete attention. I own this building, Victoria. I've owned it for 3 years. Her face went blank. That's impossible. You're nobody. You work at some tech startup in Cambridge. I own the tech company. I own this building. And I own the security firm that's been monitoring every conversation you've had in this office for the past 2 years. Elena, that's impossible. You don't have money. You live in some tiny apartment in Jamaica Plain. You buy your clothes at thrift stores. I choose to live modestly, I said calmly. But you're right about one thing I have been watching. I've been watching you steal from me. I've been watching you abandon clients who trusted you. I've been watching you turn this law firm into your personal ATM machine. Victoria's phone clattered to the floor. Elena, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. You thought I was weak. You thought I was nothing. You've spent 10 years making sure everyone in our family, everyone in our social circle, everyone in this building knew exactly how worthless you considered me to be. Elena, please, I have a career. You had a career, Hartwell interrupted quietly. Ms. Rosewood has presented compelling evidence of serious ethical violations, breach of fiduciary duty, and theft of building owner assets. I'm afraid I have no choice but to ask for your resignation, effective immediately. Victoria's legs seemed to give out. She sank into the chair she'd refused moments earlier, her perfect composure finally cracking. No. You can't do this. Elena, I'm your sister. Are you? I asked, turning back to face her. Because sisters don't humiliate each other in public. Sisters don't steal from each other. And sisters certainly don't spend a decade trying to erase each other from existence. Hartwell was already reaching for his phone. I'll need to contact the Massachusetts Bar Association immediately. These ethical violations require immediate reporting. No. Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. Elena, please, don't do this. You don't understand what this will do to me. I have a reputation, I have clients who depend on me. You have clients you've been stealing from, I corrected. And as for your reputation. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew a flash drive. This contains audio and video recordings of every client interaction you've had over the past 18 months, including the one where you laughed about Mrs. Patterson's confusion over her bill, including the one where you called Mr. Rodriguez another charity case who doesn't understand how the real world works, including the one where you told Sandra Williams that single mothers should expect their children to suffer for their poor life choices. Victoria's face had gone completely white. You can't use those recordings. They're illegal. They're perfectly legal, Hartwell said grimly. Quantum securities monitoring protocols are clearly outlined in our service agreement. Every client is informed that conversations may be recorded for security purposes. Elena, Victoria's voice had become a whisper. Please. I have a mortgage. I have car payments. I have a social life, friends, professional obligations. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Victoria? I've also forwarded copies of everything to the State Attorney General's office. They'll be conducting their own investigation into whether criminal charges are warranted. Her head snapped up. Criminal charges? Embezzlement is a felony in Massachusetts. So is fraud. You might want to call a lawyer. I smiled. Oh wait, you are a lawyer. Or were anyway. I left her there, crumbling in that corner office overlooking the city she'd thought she owned. The elevator ride down felt different this time. Lighter somehow, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't realized was there. When the doors opened on the lobby level, I found myself face to face with the receptionist who'd dismissed me so casually the day before. Ms. Rosewood, she said, and her voice was entirely different now, respectful, almost nervous. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I didn't realize that I owned the building. She nodded miserably. Would it have mattered if I'd been anyone else? If I'd just been someone who needed help? She opened her mouth, then closed it, apparently realizing that any answer would make her look worse. I'll be back tomorrow, I told her. Mr. Hartwell and I have quite a bit to discuss about how this firm treats people. As I walked out into the crisp Boston air, my phone was already buzzing with calls. The first was from Mother, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Elena, what have you done? Victoria is hysterical. She says you've cost her everything. I was standing on the steps of my building, looking up at the windows where my sister was presumably explaining to various partners and associates why she'd suddenly become unemployable. I haven't cost her anything she didn't cost herself, Mother. She made one mistake. One mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the documentation I'd compiled. She stole over $1.6 million from me. She abandoned dozens of clients who trusted her. She's been running unauthorized businesses out of my building. That's not one mistake, that's a criminal enterprise. Elena, dear, you're being dramatic. Surely we can work this out as a family. Mother, when have we ever worked anything out as a family? When did you call to ask how I was doing after Dad's funeral? When did you invite me to holiday dinners? When did any of you treat me like family? Silence stretched across the phone line. That's what I thought, I said softly. Goodbye, Mother. The next call came from my cousin James, Victoria's law school friend and weekend tennis partner. Then from Aunt Catherine, who'd never spoken to me directly but apparently felt comfortable lecturing me about family loyalty. Then from 3 family friends who'd heard rumors and wanted to get my side of the story. None of them had ever wanted my side of the story before. I turned off my phone and walked slowly through Boston Common, trying to process what I'd just done. For 15 years I'd been the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who absorbed insults and dismissals without fighting back. Today I'd finally shown them who I really was. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That evening I was back in my Jamaica Plain apartment, having traded the business blazer for comfortable jeans and a soft sweater. I'd made myself a simple dinner, pasta with marinara sauce and a side salad, and was sitting at my small dining table when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole I saw David Chen standing in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. When I opened the door, he looked up at me with an expression of pure gratitude mixed with confusion. Ms. Rosewood? I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to thank you. A lawyer called my grandmother today. She said our case was being transferred to her firm, completely pro bono. She said someone had made sure we got the help we needed. I stepped aside to let him in. David, how is your grandmother doing? Better. The lawyer thinks we can reverse the mortgage fraud. She says the company that scammed Grandma has been doing this to elderly people all over the city, and there's going to be a class action lawsuit. He paused, studying my face. The lawyer mentioned your name. She said you were the one who referred our case. I gestured for him to sit on my couch. I'm glad I could help. But I don't understand. Yesterday you said you were going to ask someone at a law firm for help. Today this big shot lawyer calls and says she's taking our case for free. What happened? I looked at this 17-year-old boy who was trying so hard to be the man of his family, to solve problems that no teenager should have to face, and I realized he deserved the truth. David, what do you know about computer programming? He blinked at the apparent change of subject. Some. I taught myself Python and JavaScript. Why? When I was your age, I was teaching myself programming too. I was invisible in my family. My older sister got all the attention, all the opportunities, all the respect. Everyone assumed I'd never amount to anything. I paused, remembering those lonely nights in my childhood bedroom, writing code while Victoria was at parties and social events. But being invisible taught me something valuable. It taught me to build things quietly, carefully, without anyone noticing. David was listening intently, his eyes wide. I built a company, David. A very successful company that provides security services to banks and law firms across New England, including the law firm where my sister worked until this morning. Worked until this morning? She was fired today. For stealing from clients, abandoning cases, and embezzling money from the building owner. I smiled. The building owner being me. David's mouth fell open. You own you're rich? I'm comfortable. But more importantly, I have power. Power to help people like your grandmother who get taken advantage of by people like my sister. We talked for another hour. I told him about MIT, about building quantum securities, about the long years of being underestimated and overlooked. I told him about the choice I'd made to live modestly, to stay invisible, so that I could help people without becoming a target myself. When he left, David shook my hand with the solemnity of someone much older than his years. Thank you, Ms. Rosewood. Not just for the lawyer, but for showing me that being smart and quiet can be more powerful than being loud and mean. After he left, I sat in my apartment and thought about the events of the day. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and text messages from family members, family friends, and people I hadn't heard from in years. All of them suddenly very interested in maintaining a relationship with me. I opened my laptop and checked my secure messages. Marcus had sent several updates throughout the day, monitoring the fallout from Victoria's termination. The news was spreading quickly through Boston's legal community. A senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms had been fired for ethical violations and potential criminal activity. How are you holding up? Marcus's latest message read. Better than expected, I typed back. Ready for phase 3. Which is making sure this never happens to anyone else. The next morning, I received a call from Jonathan Hartwell. His voice was strained, exhausted, like a man who'd spent the night trying to figure out how to save his firm's reputation. Ms. Rosewood, I wanted to update you on our internal review. We've identified 17 clients who were either overcharged or abandoned by Victoria over the past 3 years. We're prepared to offer full restitution and free legal services to resolve their cases. That's a good start, I said. There's more. The partners met in emergency session last night. We're implementing new oversight protocols, establishing a pro bono fund, and creating an ombudsman position to handle client complaints. He paused. We'd like to offer you a seat on our ethics committee. I was quiet for a moment, considering the irony. Yesterday, Victoria had humiliated me in their lobby for asking about pro bono services. Today, they wanted me to help them rebuild their ethical foundation. I'm interested, I said finally. But I have conditions. Name them. First, the pro bono fund needs to be substantial, at least $2 million to start, with annual contributions of no less than $500,000. Second, the ombudsman position needs real authority to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action. Third, I want quarterly reports on the firm's community service activities and client satisfaction metrics. Agreed. And fourth, I want a memorial established in my father's name. The Thomas Rosewood Public Interest Fellowship. Full scholarships for law students who commit to spending their first 2 years after graduation providing legal aid to low-income clients. There was a long pause. That's very generous. And entirely appropriate given your father's own commitment to public service. After I hung up, I realized that Hartwell had known my father personally. Of course he had. Dad had been a prominent figure in Boston's legal community before his death, though he'd always been more interested in justice than prestige. He would have approved of what I'd done. My phone rang again. This time it was Sarah Rodriguez, Miguel's wife. Ms. Rosewood? I got your number from the lawyer who's helping us. I wanted to thank you personally. Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. What you did, it's not just about our family. My sister works for a cleaning company downtown, and she says everyone is talking about how that rich lawyer got fired for stealing from poor people. She says it's giving hope to people who thought nobody cared about them. After the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and thought about what Mrs. Rodriguez had said. I'd started this as a personal vendetta against Victoria, a way to finally make her face consequences for years of cruelty. But it had become something larger. Over the next few weeks, the story continued to grow. The Massachusetts Bar Association launched a formal investigation into Victoria's conduct. The state attorney general's office opened a criminal inquiry into her financial activities. And 3 more law firms quietly contacted me through intermediaries, wanting to ensure they weren't harboring similar ethical problems. Victoria herself had disappeared from Boston's social scene entirely. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved back in with Mother temporarily, that she was job hunting in smaller markets where her reputation hadn't yet followed her. A few people suggested I should feel sorry for her. I didn't. 3 months later, I stood in the conference room at Hartwell & Associates, surrounded by lawyers, clients, and community advocates. We were announcing the launch of the Thomas Rosewood Public Interest Initiative, not just the fellowship program, but a comprehensive effort to provide legal services to Boston's most vulnerable residents. The room was filled with people I'd helped over the past few months, Mrs. Chen and David, who'd not only recovered their home but were part of a successful class action lawsuit against the predatory lending company. Mr. Rodriguez, whose family had won their eviction case and were now living in stable housing. Sandra Williams, who'd recovered her insurance money and was using it to start a small business. But it was the young woman in the back of the room who caught my attention. She was about 25, wearing a thrift store blazer that reminded me of my own wardrobe, and she was taking notes furiously as speakers talked about access to justice and systemic inequality. After the event, she approached me hesitantly. Ms. Rosewood? I'm Jennifer Park. I'm a second-year law student at Suffolk, and I wanted to apply for the Rosewood Fellowship. Tell me about yourself, Jennifer. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. My parents own a small restaurant in Chinatown, and I've seen how they get taken advantage of because they don't speak perfect English and don't understand legal contracts. She paused, gathering courage. I want to be the lawyer who stands up for people like them. I looked at this young woman who reminded me so much of myself at that age, intelligent, determined, and overlooked by people who confused expensive clothes with actual competence. The application process is quite competitive, I said. I understand. But I'm not afraid of hard work. Good. Because changing the world is hard work. As I walked home that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Saw the news coverage of the launch. Your father would be proud. He was right. Dad had always believed that law should be a tool for justice, not just a way to get rich. He'd tried to instill that value in both his daughters, but only one of us had been listening. 6 months later, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. Victoria was getting married to a junior partner at a small firm in Worcester, and apparently, family reconciliation was part of her image rehabilitation strategy. The invitation was written in elegant script on expensive paper, but I could read the desperation between the lines. Victoria needed to convince people that her family still supported her, that her disgrace hadn't completely destroyed her social standing. I RSVP'd yes, not because I'd forgiven her, but because I was curious to see who she'd become when she could no longer depend on Daddy's money and family connections to solve her problems. The wedding was small, held at a modest venue in Wellesley that would have horrified the old Victoria. The guest list was tiny compared to the society extravaganza she'd probably once envisioned, mostly colleagues from her new firm, a few family friends who hadn't completely written her off, and relatives who felt obligated to attend regardless of their personal feelings. As I watched her exchange vows with a man who clearly didn't know about her past, or was choosing to overlook it for reasons of his own, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. She'd built her entire identity on being better than everyone else, especially me. Now that those supports had been stripped away, she seemed smaller somehow, less substantial. Like a house of cards that had finally collapsed, leaving nothing but debris behind. During the reception, she approached me at the bar where I was ordering a ginger ale. "Elena," she said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." I wasn't sure either. We stood in awkward silence for a moment, watching her new husband charm a group of his colleagues with stories about law school and their plans for the future. "I've been thinking about what you said," Victoria continued. "About family. About how we treated you." I turned to look at her. She was still beautiful, still poised, but there was something fragile in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked almost like humility. And you were right. We were cruel to you. I was cruel to you." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm sorry." It was probably the first genuine thing she'd said to me in years. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." "Does this mean?" She gestured vaguely between us. "It means I'm glad you're working on becoming a better person," I said. "But it doesn't erase 10 years of damage. Trust is rebuilt slowly, Victoria. If it can be rebuilt at all." She looked like she wanted to say more, but her new husband appeared at her elbow, all smiles and small talk. As I watched them walk away together, I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel much of anything, actually. She'd become irrelevant to my life in a way that felt surprisingly peaceful. On the drive home, I stopped at the cemetery where Dad was buried. I'd avoided his grave for years, unable to separate my grief from my anger at how the family had treated me after his death. But now, sitting beside his headstone with the late afternoon sun warming my face, I felt ready to talk to him. "I did it, Dad," I said quietly. "I used what you taught me. I built something that matters." The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice. "I'm proud of you, Elena. I always knew you were the strong one." As I drove back to the city, my phone rang. It was Jennifer Park, the law student who'd received the first Rosewood Fellowship. "Elena, I hope I'm not bothering you on a Saturday." "Never, Jennifer. What's going on?" "I wanted to update you on the housing discrimination case we've been working on. The judge ruled in our favor this morning. 15 families are going to be able to stay in their apartments, and the landlord has to pay damages for the illegal evictions." I had to pull over because my eyes were suddenly too blurry to drive safely. "That's wonderful news." "There's more," she continued. 3 other law students want to join the fellowship program next year. And Professor Martinez says she wants to create a clinic focused on immigrant rights, using the Rosewood Initiative as a model. That's exactly what should happen. "Elena," her voice became serious, "none of this would have happened if you hadn't stood up to your sister. You saved more than just a few families. You changed how people think about what lawyers should be doing." After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the sun set over Boston Harbor. I thought about the girl who used to read law books in her bedroom, dreaming of a day when she could help people seek justice. It had taken longer than I'd expected, and the path had been more painful than I'd imagined, but somehow that dream had come true. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "New client wants to meet Monday. Healthcare company that's been denying coverage to cancer patients. You interested?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely." As I started the car and headed home to Jamaica Plain, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I was finally proud to be, quiet but strong, overlooked but powerful, underestimated but undeniably effective. 2 years after Victoria's termination, I was invited to speak at Harvard Law School's graduation ceremony. The invitation had come from Dean Matthews, who'd heard about the Rosewood Initiative and wanted me to address the graduating class about the intersection of technology and public interest law. Standing at the podium in that August hall, looking out at 300 young lawyers about to enter the profession, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of being dismissed and underestimated. The quiet building of skills and resources. The careful planning that had finally allowed me to fight back. "You're about to enter a profession that has tremendous power," I told them. Power to help people or to exploit them. Power to seek justice or to perpetuate inequality. Power to build bridges or to tear them down. I paused, seeing Jennifer Park in the third row, beaming with pride as she prepared to graduate summa cum laude. "Some of you will be offered positions at prestigious firms where you'll make a lot of money helping rich people get richer. There's nothing inherently wrong with that path, but I want you to remember something. True power doesn't come from the size of your paycheck or the prestige of your letterhead. True power comes from using whatever influence you have to help people who don't have any." After the ceremony, I was approached by a young man who looked familiar. It took me a moment to recognize him, one of the associates who'd been present during Victoria's humiliation of me in the Hartwell and Associates lobby 2 years earlier. "Ms. Rosewood," he said nervously, "I wanted to apologize for that day in the lobby. I should have said something." I studied his face, remembering the eager way he'd laughed at Victoria's jokes at my expense. "What's your name?" "David Kim. I left Hartwell after what happened with Victoria. I'm working for legal aid now." "What made you change course?" "Watching what you did. Seeing how someone could use power responsibly instead of just using it to hurt people." He paused. I realized I didn't want to be the kind of lawyer who laughs when someone asks for help. 3 years later, the Rosewood Initiative had expanded beyond Boston. We had fellowship programs in 6 cities, legal clinics in 12 states, and a network of attorneys committed to providing pro bono services to underserved communities. The initiative had helped thousands of families fight evictions, recover stolen wages, escape predatory lending schemes, and access basic legal services they never could have afforded otherwise. But it was a small ceremony in Jamaica Plain that meant the most to me. Mrs. Chen, now 83 and still sharp as a tack, was being honored by the city for her advocacy work with elderly residents facing housing discrimination. David had graduated from MIT with a degree in computer science and was working for a nonprofit that developed technology solutions for legal aid organizations. "None of this would have happened without you," Mrs. Chen told me after the ceremony, her weathered hands holding mine with surprising strength. "You would have found another way," I said. "People like you always do." She shook her head. "People like me get pushed around until someone with real power decides to pay attention. You taught us that we don't have to accept being invisible." That evening, I walked through the streets of my neighborhood, past the community center where Jennifer Park now ran a legal clinic, past the small restaurant where the Rodriguez family had opened a second location after their legal victory, past the apartment building where Mrs. Chen lived independently because she'd been able to keep her home. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, "Board meeting tomorrow. Ready to announce the next phase?" I smiled and typed back, "Always ready." The next phase was ambitious even by our standards, a nationwide network of legal tech platforms that would make basic legal services accessible to anyone with an internet connection. We'd been developing the technology for 18 months, creating automated systems that could help people draft wills, understand their rights as tenants, file for small claims court, and access emergency protective orders. The goal wasn't to replace lawyers but to democratize access to justice. Too many people couldn't afford legal help for basic issues, and too many lawyers were too focused on wealthy clients to serve the broader community. Our platform would bridge that gap, providing immediate assistance while connecting people with pro bono attorneys when more complex help was needed. As I walked home to my small apartment, I'd chosen to stay in Jamaica Plain despite my wealth, partly out of genuine affection for the neighborhood and partly because I'd learned the value of remaining underestimated. I thought about how far I'd come from that humiliating day in Victoria's office. I'd learned that true power wasn't about revenge, though revenge had certainly been satisfying. True power was about building systems that made revenge unnecessary, creating a world where people like Victoria couldn't exploit vulnerable individuals with impunity. My phone rang one more time as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. Ms. Rosewood? This is Maria Santos. I'm a reporter for the Boston Globe. I'm working on a story about the Rosewood Initiative, and I was hoping I could interview you. What's the angle? How technology and law can work together to serve people who've been excluded from the justice system. Your sister's case was the catalyst, but the real story is what you've built since then. I paused at my door, key in hand. I'm not particularly interested in publicity. I understand. But people need to know that change is possible. That one person with the right skills and the right motivation can make a difference for thousands of others. Send me your questions in writing. I'll consider it. Thank you. And Ms. Rosewood? For what it's worth, I think what you've done is remarkable. You've proven that the meek really can inherit the earth. After I hung up, I stood in my small apartment and looked around at the life I'd built. The second-hand furniture, the thriving plants, the walls covered with photographs from community events and thank you letters from families we'd helped. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real in a way that Victoria's marble and mahogany world had never been. I opened my laptop and checked my secure messages. There were updates from Jennifer and the other fellowship recipients, reports from legal clinics across the country, and financial statements showing that our various initiatives were not just sustainable but growing. But the message that made me smile was from David Chen. Ms. Rosewood, I wanted you to know that I got into law school. Full scholarship to Boston University. I'm going to be a lawyer who actually helps people. Thank you for showing me it was possible. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the lights of the city where I'd been born but had never truly belonged until I'd made my own place in it. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably still trying to rebuild her reputation and reclaim her social standing. Somewhere else, dozens of young lawyers were beginning their careers with a commitment to justice rather than just profit. And in communities across the country, families who'd been abandoned by the legal system were getting help they'd never thought possible. The meek had inherited the earth, one case at a time, one family at a time, one victory at a time. And I was just getting started.